Welcome, Rennie. Thank you so much for being with us and being willing to share about your process in making movement and working with the written word. By the way, I also want to talk to you about the amazing 5 elements that you have talked about in the past, which is so fabulous and cool. Anyway, can you share with us a little bit of how you got started on Roman Jewels?
What was interesting about it was that uh, since the first time I saw um, West Side Story, I remember thinking, and I was a kid when I saw it, and on the movie, and so I remember thinking, well, why don't they have street dancers? Like, and I didn't recognize the form of dance. I didn't at that time. I didn't know what jazz or that type of jazz or modern about none of. I didn't know about those things, and so I just remember thinking, man, oh, this would have been so much better if they had street dancers. And so years, of course, go by, and then I'm a grown man now, and I can't remember the actual what made me decide to start working on it. Probably because back then I got support financially from grants like in the latter part of the 90s, I felt like, but in the earlier part, I didn't. And so I started working on snippets of it with the company with no money, to see what I wanted to do. And so, and in that process, it was Rodney Mason who plays the lead, who plays Rome. He Up until that point, it was a West Side Story thing. And I'm just working on like trying to do the West Side Story thing. And at this point, I'm not really going into text. I brought in a dramaturg. No, this is before I brought the dramaturg in. We're just working with movement, and I've already separated the families. So I haven't really fully gone into text yet. Kind of somewhat. Rodney Mason, who plays Rome, walks into rehearsal and says, "Yo, she said, "Yo, Benvolio," like that. He goes, "What's up with that?" And everyone went, "Oh no," he says, "Thou art a villain, so what's up?" And I went, "Oh snap!" And bang, it becomes Romeo and Juliet. And so we explored the text. I written. So what? Prior to that, I had written this thing out, right? Or a little bit right before that. So I wrote the whole thing, right? And but I really more or less in sort of Ebonic slang way, right? But not necessarily Shakespeare's per se. So the actors, as what I found out about Rodney, that he was like an avid reader of Shakespeare's work, Elizabethan text and Shakespeare's work. And that, it just surprised me because he's from the hood. I'm stereotyping him, right? He was also a veteran. He fought in the Gulf War. You know what I mean? And so he's like, his mind is, he's not from the hood, so as I thought he was, right? And so what I started to do was then sort of mix the idea of the sort of slang with the idea of actual Shakespearean, the Elizabethan text, the Shakespearean text, right? And then I think, if I'm correct, it was Rodney Mason again, and maybe Rodney Mason and then Sabella Grimes, D. Sabella Grimes. Rodney Mason comes in, and he's going through the moment where he sort of runs into Ben V, and I kind of gave him Ben V and gave him their characters, and he goes into this poem, and I'm doing like this. I don't see, where is that coming from? I don't even know that it's a poem because the way he's saying it is so real that he just added his own poetry because he wrote poetry to it. And then bing, that was it. Because the truth of the matter is, in my opinion, at that time, none of these cats were actors. They were all dancers. But they wrote poetry. They did which I didn't have a clue. And so Sabela then came in with some stuff, and we started, mix and matching. Like, okay, let's say this and let's take this out. Let's put your poem here. Like if you had to write your own monologue for this particular moment, you know what I mean? And so as they began to add to the original script their own voice to it, the characters began to shape themselves. Ben V was basically a misogynist. Like he didn't want Rome. Rome was spending too much time with Jules, and he's trying to cause a war. He wants to go to war, And so Rome is like faking the funk. He ain't really tough, but and Ben V calls his car like, pulls his car like, I know, and that is that one moment on the side when Mercutio says, used to be hip hop, used to be hardcore. Now you acting a little bit R&B-ish to me. You know what I mean? And so they call it, you know what I mean? And then, Rome has to buck up a little bit and be like, what, and so, yeah, so I started just having fun with the character building on that, and honestly, I felt like I let the choreography wane, like it. I didn't pay enough attention to the choreography because the choreography is okay, right? But it's some moments that I like what we do to Portishead. You know what I mean? So anyway, that's kind of like a quick version of how we start. And I brought the dramaturgy in. Then and he was like, "Man, you already got it." And then I wound up adding him to the show to play the old man. We called him old man, but he was the older brother, the older cat in the West Side Story. What's his name? Tone, I think it was, or Tony, or I forget the guy's name. But the older cat that they kept referring, that wasn't in the gang. It used to be in the gang, kind of thing. And so I kind of set him up with that, and he had like a cross dual character, between a priest and he was also in the gang.
I just love how you invited the creativity of your cast and that poetry coming forward from them in the moment. That is just spectacular. And that's a fabulous way of collaborating and just building on those ideas in such a beautiful way. I have to say that, when I've heard you talk about breaking and those explosions of emotion, and I was watching the clip, the Massa Hip Hop, that is just mind-blowing in terms of exploding this emotion and threat and battle, and I'm going to kick your ass kind of a thing. I mean, it's just beautiful. Can you talk about that scene a little bit?
This is the battle. This is when Rome. One of the things I think is important also to the sort of like kind of setup is the fact that originally, before we got to Bates, and it was a 45-minute work, and I think from Seattle, well, not Seattle, on the boards, not Ken Foster, I forget, where I showed it for the first time because they was like, no, you got to show, like, because no one's seen it but one person. Because I was just working on it on my own. So there was Jules was an actual physical person. And so somehow I think I fired her. I let her go. Like, it was some kind of drama went on. And so we debated for weeks about replacing her. Me and the dramaturg went back and forth, and then it kind of became clear that Jules was the figment of Rome's imagination. Like, it's about men conjuring women into who they want them to be for them, right? So it becomes full on. This was for me, this was the moment where, like, okay, Shakespeare stuff, most of the men are playing the women's parts, but now we just flip this whole Like let's really show the whole thing, you know. And so in any case, Tybalt finds out from one of his crew members that Rome is messing with Jules, and he comes in, and that's when the whole thing begins. And so the idea of these families was to, like, breaking was just such a, you know, breaking comes from gang culture. And so it's more rah-rah, more like in your face, where hip hop itself, what I call hip hop proper, which was, you know, Rome's family, is more of like, is gangster, but to me is more bluesy, right? It's a little bit more a rise a wave kind of thing. And so I thought, like, by separating those two families and by way of style, that this would really bring home like the differences between the differences of street dance and what have you, you know what I mean? And so I had to instruct Rome's family, like, not to do any dynamic movement. Don't try not to flip. You can flip, but don't break, you know, and let the breakers break and the hip hoppers do hip hop. And I allowed the hip hoppers to do some popping, but that was it, you know. But it was really about, you know, these sort of war. Of course, it was about these warring factions, but it was just about, you know, sort of microcosm of like the world to me. You know what I mean? Like what we're fighting over, shit that we're creating on our own. We're creating this sort of these things are this, you know, when you have you're creating well, fake news, so to speak, right? Like you're creating these things and you're making people, and then you're fighting about the stuff that wasn't really, there was nothing. It was like going to war for weapons of mass destruction. There was nothing there. You got me? And so that was the biggest part for me about that scene, was like, and so I don't know, in the clip that you saw, sometimes we had like warheads going off. We had cartoons, Tom and Jerry fighting. You know what I mean? We just do everything, and all those things were being put in live because we had to get around copyright. So, so we, like, you know what I mean? Like, and you see him, the visual artist is back, you know, just throwing up images, you know, all kinds of stuff. And so, like, so I felt like it was just a really, like, while you're watching it here, but really all this undercurrent, this other story is happening on a whole other level. Like, you know, it is representative of the hip hop culture imploding itself. Like in the very beginning, when Old Man, he comes on, he says, Big and Pac roam for jewels, but don't we all? We ain't nothing until we become a mural on some motherfucker's wall. So when he says Big and Pac, he's talking about Biggie and Pac and Tupac, right? So Big and Pac roam for jewels, but don't we all? The title Roman Jewels is a play, is a dig at the hip hop community, because we're always roaming for jewelry. We're searching for the golden calf, right? So he says, Big and Pac roam for jewels, but don't we all? You ain't nothing. You're on some motherfucker's wall. One big, fat, black, and ugly. The other one scarred up like tags on the train, spitting freestyles for 30 G's with pounds of weed on his brain. Now here, heartbreak gets popped to while bullets crash through. Because in the jungle sometimes, what does love got to do? When all your eyes are set on nothing, you get tempted like David Ruffin. Because in the death angel's arms, our screams sound like mumbling. Through Rome, we see jewels. And here, Rome stands for quest to get love, props, or dough before he dies from the stress. And so that whole opening really sums up the fact that we're on this quest for, you know, the golden fleece as a globally, you know what I mean? Like, it's such all these other things that play in there, other than it's like, you know, this unacquitted love. You know what I mean?
It's just absolutely fabulous. I mean, and so incredibly interesting. And I could have you talk for a very long time because this is such an interesting subject. But I'm going to share this with our students, and we may reach out to you again, because this is just an extraordinary piece, and we thank you so much. And
you have the first half as well?
No, I don't, unfortunately. I don't know how to get it.
That's your if that's your email, I'll find it and send it to you.
That would be fabulous.
Yeah.
Rennie, thank you so much, man. Thank you so much. This is just beautiful.
Yeah.
All right.